existing school buses with zero-emission school buses that produce no emissions of any air pollutant or greenhouse gas. The other 50% are to be used for replacing existing school buses with clean school buses, defined as a bus that reduces emissions and uses an alternative fuel, like propane, or as a zero-emission school bus. Unfortunately, the EPA appears to be favoring unreliable and expensive electric school buses. We're talking 2 to 3 times the cost over clean school buses. The federal government should not be in the business of picking winners and losers. And what happens when the federal subsidies run out? Will school districts be able to continue charging, maintaining, and repairing these expensive buses? Will there even be a market for them without the federal government grants and rebates? The fact is, these vehicles are more expensive, and the limited charging infrastructure and operational limitations, especially as a result of extreme weather, make these buses completely impractical in many parts of the country. The administration's forced electric transition will make us more dependent on China, which dominates the EV battery market and supply chains for critical materials necessary to build electric vehicles. Earlier this year, the EPA's Office of Inspector General, OIG, launched an audit of this program to examine whether potential supply chain or production delays could negatively impact the agency's ability to distribute funds. And this is just part of the unprecedented $102 billion the EPA received from the IRA and the IIJA. I had the opportunity to meet with the Inspector General last month to discuss the challenges ahead and OIG's efforts to safeguard taxpayer funds against waste, fraud, and abuse. And I look forward to continuing that important discussion today. Ensuring our children's safety should be the #1 priority for any program looking to improve student transportation resources. The unprecedented amount of taxpayer dollars was spent last Congress, and Americans must know, there must be transparency as to how it's being spent. Beyond this program, I have broader concerns with the EPA. While the EPA was created by an executive order, Congress never actually authorized the EPA. And apparently the EPA believes many times it doesn't have to take direction from Congress. I fear that it has replaced its own core mission of protecting human health and the environment with a harmful political agenda to force an energy transition onto American families and businesses who will suffer. I hope today's hearing will shed more light on this, which will unfortunately ultimately help us restore accountability at the EPA. I yield back.
Chairwoman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have to start out by saying that the only way that we're going to have more electric vehicles, more electric buses, more clean energy buses, more EV charging stations is if we build more and create more. And if we let China do it and say, well, they're way ahead of us and so we shouldn't bother, then we're only going to be in a worse situation. So I really don't understand the Republican mantra that, there aren't enough buses, there aren't enough charging stations. Well, then let's change it. Let's not just, say that, this is, we're going to go back to the past and continue we're doing what we're doing. Let's change it. And we have to, because we've long known that harmful emissions from school buses that use fossil fuels can exacerbate childhood asthma, increase a child's lifetime cancer risk, and contribute to the climate crisis. But fortunately, there are newer buses that can reduce or eliminate school bus emissions. But tight budgets, coupled with high operating costs of existing bus fleets, make it impossible for many schools to replace outdated buses. And it's particularly difficult for underserved communities to invest in school bus upgrades, even though these upgrades would reduce future fuel costs. These communities are also disproportionately affected by air pollution, and these upgrades would better protect both the health of students and the surrounding community. So we created programs at the EPA that have helped replace the oldest, most polluting buses with new models that meet EPA's diesel emission standards. And then last Congress, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, we invested $5 billion over 5 years in EPA's Clean School Bus Program. And this funding helps the EPA build on past success protecting public health while also combating the climate crisis. Today, the Clean School Bus Program is taking the oldest and most outdated school buses off the road and replacing them with cleaner, modern buses. These investments are helping schools enjoy immediate cost savings on fuel and maintenance that can be reinvested in the classroom or to pay for future fleet upgrades. Now, the Clean School Bus Program is still in the early stages, but initial results are promising. In 2022, EPA received thousands of applications from schools and communities to replace more than 12,000 buses. To better meet this desire for clean school buses, EPA increased the award pool from $500 million to $965 million. EPA then prioritized eligible applications from rural, low-income, tribal, and other underserved communities using criteria set forth in statute by Congress. Now, many schools that received awards last year have started to use clean school buses to provide a healthier environment for their students while realizing immediate cost savings that will continue to grow over time. I call that an early success. But committee Republicans are looking to undermine the program and these investments simply because every single one of them opposed the bipartisan infrastructure law, and Republicans are deliberately misleading the public about this program in order to prop up their friends in the fossil fuel industry. The Clean School Bus Program provides funds for electric buses as well as low-emission propane and compressed natural gas buses. Congress gave schools the flexibility to choose from a range of technologies so new buses would fit their needs, and schools spoke loudly and clearly. More than 90% of the applications that EPA received for the first round of rebates were for zero-emission electric school buses. Schools want clean buses, and EPA is delivering. Now, I appreciate hearing from the Inspector General about his work or their work in detecting waste, fraud, and abuse, but the Republican majority is holding this hearing before the Inspector General has even completed an initial audit of the Clean School Bus Program. Reports and audits from IG are invaluable to Congress in their oversight efforts, but IGs need to actually complete their audits to have those results. Democrats are committed to conducting constructive oversight that can help programs succeed and complement an IG's important work. We need to make sure that EPA's Clean School Bus Program is successful, and constructive oversight is one of the best ways to protect these investments. But we shouldn't confuse fear-mongering on behalf of the fossil fuel industry with real oversight. So I look forward to hearing about the risks and challenges that could hinder federal investments so that we can ensure that this program is successful and that there is an expansion of clean school buses in communities all around the nation, including, I should say, in the communities of my Republican colleagues here today who also are reaping the advantage of these investments, even though they oppose them. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. And that concludes members' opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' written opening statements will be made a part of the record. Please provide those to the clerk promptly. We want to thank our witness for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. You will have the opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from members. Our witness today is the Honorable Sean O'Donnell, Inspector General, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. We appreciate you being here today. Look forward to hearing from you. As you are aware, the committee is holding an oversight hearing, and when doing so, we have the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to testifying under oath?
I do not.
Gentleman indicates he has no objection testifying under oath. The chair would also advise you that you are entitled to be advised by counsel pursuant to House rules. Do you desire to have your attorney represent you be advised by counsel today during your testimony?
I didn't bring an attorney, so I think I'll be all right.
All right. I think you will be too, but the gentleman does not request an attorney to be present with him, so if you would, please rise and raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Seeing the witness has answered in the affirmative, you may see, you are now sworn in and under oath, subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. With that, we will now recognize Mr. O'Donnell for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, Chairman Griffith, Ranking Member Castor, and members of the committee. I'm Sean O'Donnell, the Inspector General for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I would like to thank the committee for inviting me to testify today about the Office of Inspector General's oversight of the $5 billion provided to the EPA through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to replace existing school buses with clean or zero-emission school buses. In brief, the IIJA's Clean School Bus Program allows the EPA to pay up to 100% of the costs for replacing existing school buses. Eligible recipients include governmental entities and third-party contractors. In its first funding round, the EPA used rebates because it believed that this would be the fastest way to distribute funds. These are not, however, rebates in the sense that maybe you or I would understand them, where a customer first spends money and then receives a partial refund. Instead, after a recipient submits a payment request form with verified purchase orders, but before the recipient has received the bus, the EPA will wire the money to the recipient's bank account. For this round, the EPA approved nearly $1 billion in rebates for around 400 recipients to purchase approximately 2,600 buses, 94% of which were electric. For the second funding round, the EPA will distribute funds through grants. Unlike these rebates, these grants are subject to the Uniform Grant Guidance and other audit requirements. It is our understanding, and it's probably not surprising, that interest in this second funding round has been lower, despite the EPA having a 71-page wait list for the first funding round. The EPA has indicated that it might return to rebates for the third funding round. We are currently conducting an audit to determine whether potential supply chain or production delays could impact the EPA's efforts to disperse and manage these funds. While the results are preliminary, one noteworthy finding is potential delays related to the infrastructure needed to support the chargers, including the increased demand on local electric utilities. Furthermore, there was no mechanism in the application process to ensure that applicants had coordinated with local utilities before applying. This has had consequences, and perhaps not surprising ones, because around 1/3 of rebate recipients requested additional time to coordinate with local utilities. Our initial calculation, which will be subject to further verification, is that these extensions represent 502 buses totaling nearly $188 million in rebates. Yesterday, my office announced two additional projects: an evaluation of the EPA's selection of recipients for funding and an audit of the EPA's oversight of rebate recipients. We initiated the evaluation based on congressional concerns that the rebate selection process resulted in an imbalance in funded technologies. And we initiated the audit to determine whether the EPA has strong monitoring controls to ensure that rebate recipients are using program funds that are residing in their bank account for intended purposes. Finally, our investigators are busy identifying fraud vulnerabilities in the Clean School Bus Program, such as those involving funding delivery, school bus retirement, and third-party participation. Furthermore, we are leveraging data analytics internally to identify leads for our investigators and externally on our new website to inform the public of where their public tax dollars are going. Although I cannot discuss specific ongoing investigations, I can tell you that we are already conducting investigatory work in this area. Again, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. As I noted in my March 29th testimony before this subcommittee, my office is executing determined oversight despite a decade of flat or declining budgets. And we are grateful that Congress dedicated funding for us to oversight the EPA's funding under the IIJA. However, unlike other OIGs, we did not receive supplemental funding under the IRA to carry out our oversight mandate. H.R. 4821, the House version of the Department of Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriation Act for fiscal year 2024, includes a provision that would transfer 0.2% of obligated EPA or unobligated EPA IRA funding to the OIG for such oversight. I am hopeful that this provision will be passed in conference to enable my office to provide meaningful oversight for the EPA's $41.5 billion in IRA appropriations. In closing, today's hearing posed the question: is the EPA's Clean School Bus Program making the grade? After the first funding round, it's too early to tell. If I had to give a grade today, it would be an incomplete, with homework assignments still due. Our feedback, however, to the EPA has been clear and consistent. The EPA must ensure that requirements are met it must provide clear and comprehensive guidance, and it must improve project management, monitoring, and data verification. I am sure, though, with help from Oversight and our continued engagement with the EPA from program design to execution, we can get the EPA to an A. Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. We'll now move into question and answer part of the hearing. I will begin the questioning by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. So I have to tell you that I have a large rural district with lots of mountains. So I texted while we were talking, because some folks don't understand the problem, I don't think. I texted my district director, Josh Hess, who played football for Powerhouse Richlands High School in Richlands, Virginia, and said, what was the furthest game you went to? In district, he went to Carroll County, Hillsville. It's 101 miles one way. Now, it is true we've built tunnels to get through 2 of the mountains, so while there are still a lot of hills, the biggest of the mountains you can get around without too much trouble. But based on my research, and you tell me if there's something new out there, these electric school buses don't get from somewhere between 100 to 200 miles, depending on which make and which battery level you're at. And, of course, I already mentioned in my opening the cost of the replacement batteries. So you might not get back from the game if you take an electric school bus from Richlands to Hillsville. By the way, all of that's in the 9th Congressional District. And he told me also that the furthest they went when he got into the playoffs, they went to Brookville, which is a few miles outside of the district, but not more than about 15 minutes outside of the district at most. And that's 195 miles. You might get there, but you might not get back. So is this really practical for schools to have an all-electric fleet?
Well, thank you for the question. The IIJA obviously expresses a intent of Congress that half that funding will go to electric school buses. The other half will go to clean school buses.
But the data indicates, at least in the first tranche of spending, it's going to be about 95% electric. Isn't that accurate?
Yes, that's right. And that's why we've undertaken our evaluation to understand how the selection process ended up in such an imbalance of technologies. My understanding at this juncture is that the EPA has exercised its discretion or its decision-making power under the criteria for that second half to determine that the zero-emission buses meet the definition of clean school bus. It is permitted under the statute, as I understand it, in lieu of the alternative fuel. And so, sir, as I was saying, this is what our evaluation is really going to start looking at, is what was the process that the EPA went through to determine how they were going to fund the buses.
Because natural gas might work in my district. It might. I don't know. We'll see. All right. There's several other problematic aspects of the program. For example, if a school district does not have any 2010 or older diesel buses to replace, it may replace a 2011 or newer bus by selling it. According to the EPA, quote, income from the sale of the old bus will not impact the rebate amount, end quote. So let me understand this. The EPA is paying the school districts to upgrade buses that are not even a decade old, and then if the school district sells it, they get to pocket the profit or the cash. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding as well, and as I had mentioned, our investigators are looking at all of the possible fraud vulnerabilities. This is the one I think we call the school bus goes round and round, and our concern would be that school buses get passed from one district to the next in order to justify a replacement for the government-funded replacement. And so these are the sorts of things that we will be looking at. We will help the agency look at. I want to be clear. I understand that the agency has some follow-up, that's conducting follow-up. The agency has taken some of the most advanced systems yet that they've employed in administering the rebates, but there's still a lot of work to make sure that these fraud vulnerabilities are not taken advantage of.
Yeah, because it seems like some flatland district where the school bus might work for, getting around most of the area and doing stuff. And I recognize in the flatland area it might work. In an area where you've got a moderate temperature, that this may very well be effective. But they can then sell their diesel buses to my district where the electric bus just probably ain't going to function very well. All right. In your testimony, you also expressed concern with the so-called destruction protocol that school districts are supposed to utilize when scrapping, selling, or donating old buses, so they couldn't necessarily sell it to my district. How is the EPA currently planning to minimize risks such as recipients selling or keeping buses that are supposed to be destroyed?
So my understanding is, as part of the process, and frankly, with respect to the rebates, is our view that there are very few touch points in the process. One of those touch points is completing a scrapping certification. That includes an identification of the bus by VIN and pictures of the engine receiving, sort of being put to rest, if you will. And the axle and the chassis, the back chassis being separated. So that's the extent to which there is verification that the scrapping protocol has occurred. We're not sure that that's robust enough. Like I said, we're still really looking into that part on an investigatory side.
Well, and I've got to tell you, for a lot of my districts that are short on cash and really I represent a economically stressed region of the country, I'm not so sure selling them to those school districts at a discount isn't a better plan than scrapping them. But that being said, I yield back and now recognize Ms. Castor, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. It's good to see you again. The EPA's Clean School Bus Program is a clear example of what we can do, I think, when Congress listens to our communities back home and we combine it with American innovation and know-how, because this important initiative is taking polluting school buses off the street and cleaning up the air for our kids as they travel to and from school. It's helping school districts save money. So it's really a win-win-win, I think, for our communities. Are school districts required to apply for the Clean School Bus grants and rebates?
No, they're not required to.
Okay. EPA also has a very important public health mission. So evaluating the health benefits of clean school buses can inform our ongoing work to keep kids safe and ensure that our communities have clean air. We also want to provide school districts with all necessary information as they consider the value of applying for these grants. So does your office have any plans to evaluate the health benefits of cleaner air resulting from the Clean School Bus Initiative?
I know that EPA speaks to that. That's a difficult thing to obviously measure. I will say our sense is that in the funding structure that the EPA has chosen, they have incentivized school districts to ask for electric school buses as opposed to alternative fuel school buses. So the EPA has said that they will fund up to the entire cost of an electric school bus, but they will only fund a partial amount of the alternative fuel. And so, like I said, these are
So they've built, the EPA is built in kind of that health consideration, but as you go forward with your analysis, your future audit, you don't have plans to build that in as part of your review?
Not yet. Fortunately, we have the money for this, and our plans are, these are just the beginning of, I think there's a lot of work that we can do to help the EPA.
Diesel school buses also are contributing to the higher cost driven by the climate crisis, and replacing old buses helps us move forward on our climate goals. And the transportation sector is where we know what we need to be doing, and it's probably a little easier than some of the other sectors. Industrial sector, we don't have a lot of the answers yet. Isn't it true that transitioning to those zero-emission buses will have the greatest emission reductions relative to fossil fuel-powered options?
I believe that's what the EPA has said time and again, and just as we at OIG, we have identified the EPA's response and leadership with respect to climate change as a top management challenge facing the agency, and some of our work, though not with this yet, is looking at the resiliency planning for climate change. We haven't yet turned to a school bus, but we do look at it with respect to, say, the water and wastewater sectors. So yes, resiliency is very important as well.
Your testimony includes plans to evaluate EPA selection process, given Republicans' belief that EPA should have awarded more rebates for low-emission buses. What % of applications EPA received during the first round of awards were zero-emission school buses?
It's my understanding, I think about 90% as far as what I read from the EPA.
And under the Clean School Bus Program, Congress gave school districts flexibility to replace their old diesel-powered buses with a range of clean technology options. So looking at the applications,
zero-emission electric buses are clearly what our school districts want to invest in. On top of the helping us save on the climate side and reduce pollution and the health benefits, zero-emission school buses save schools money on fuel and maintenance costs. On average, it's estimated that schools can save up to $10,000 annually for each bus they replace with a zero-emission electric bus. So I don't think it's surprising that school districts want buses that produce such large cost savings. That's what I'm hearing at home. It's a lot of the upfront costs that they're looking at now, and they need a little help with that. So I think these are vital federal investments in our communities. They're already paying off. We've got to do more. We've got to continue to provide continuity. So thank you for helping us continue to watch and evaluate the success of this initiative. In the meantime, I hope we can work together on this committee to make sure EPA has the resources necessary to continue here. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gently yields back. Now recognize the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. McMorris Rogers, for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Inspector General, I have major concerns about the lack of EPA internal controls and internal audits necessary to effectively administer programs handling IIJA funds. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars. Does the EPA have an internal auditing system?
So I'm not aware that the EPA has a unit for internal audit. I've never seen it. We've asked. No, I don't believe they do.
Would you discuss how not having an internal auditor raises potential for waste, fraud, and abuse at an agency?
So many departments in the federal government have internal audits. As you might know, I was the acting inspector general at the Department of Defense for nearly 3 years, and internal audit is just a function, a well-established function inside the Department of Defense, and it really serves a management function of helping, like you said, ensure that waste, fraud, and abuse is being prevented and detected, but also that the intentions of the contractor or the agency are being met. So it is a really important management tool, and I want to contrast it with what our role is. So yes, I have auditors. Yes, we do audits, but we do oversight. We do oversight, and we report not just to the administrator, but also to you all. And that puts us in a fundamentally different position from internal audit.
Thank you. The EPA's annual appropriation for fiscal year 2023 was just over $10 billion. The Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided EPA a combined $102 billion, 10 times the amount of funding EPA is used to. To your knowledge, does the EPA intend to create an internal auditing system to monitor this unprecedented amount of money it's received?
Not that I know of.
Under its 2022 rebate program, the EPA funded 2,408 electric school buses compared to 109 propane buses and 16 compressed natural gas buses. Under that round of funding, the maximum amount of funding for the, I'm going to call them so-called zero-emission buses, because I think we still have to ask, where does electricity come from, was 10 times greater than that for a propane or compressed natural gas school bus. In its response to our letter about this, the EPA stated that they would continue to follow the IIJA and would, quote, award grant and rebate funds in response to the school bus types that school districts expressed interest in purchasing. However, it's clear from the latest round of funding that the EPA plans to continue to favor electric school buses over propane and compressed natural gas buses. For example, the EPA has indicated it would make funding available for electric charging infrastructure, but not propane or compressed natural gas fueling infrastructure. Additionally, the EPA has ruled that model year 2011 or newer buses and 2010 or older gasoline buses can only be replaced by electric buses. Finally, EPA announced that it provides as much as 10 times the funding for zero-emission school buses as propane school buses under the latest round of funding. Mr. Inspector General, you mentioned in your testimony that your office plans to review the EPA's selection of recipients under this program. Will you be examining why EPA is choosing to favor electric buses over propane when the law allows for both?
Right, and as you alluded to, I think Representative Castor also pointed to it, for that half of funding that's going to clean school buses, there are factors that need to be considered. The lowest cost, local conditions like weather, bus routes and the like, the efficacy of emission reduction and sort of the technology growth. And what we will do is make sure that in making the funding decisions, the EPA is abiding by the criteria that Congress set forth in making those determinations.
Okay, are you able to share any more details as to your review to EPA's selection of recipients?
No, I can speak to the numbers that are public. As we just heard, 90% of applicants asked for zero emission electric buses. 94 were awarded. I think if you look at the funding structure, as I said, there is a sense in which the EPA has incentivized school districts to ask for electric school buses, and that they will reimburse the entire cost of an electric school bus, but it appears only a partial for alternative fuel. I think we'll kind of get into the understanding maybe of the why school districts, some school districts made those decisions. But we just announced yesterday, so I know we're all excited. I'm very excited about it. We've done some preliminary research, and as we start to have findings like we are here, I'm always happy to talk about what we're seeing, because I don't want to, I'm not out to hide things. And I would also add too, just a brief point. The EPA has engaged us in the program design since the very beginning, right? They've followed OMB directives. And so while it might seem like, oh, it's early for you all, in fact, the EPA sees value in talking to us from the very beginning and hearing from us. And I think Congress benefits from that as well.
Thank you. On behalf of hardworking taxpayer families that I represent in Eastern Washington, thank you for being here and your work. I yield back.
Now recognize thank you for yielding back. Now recognize Ms. Schakowsky of Illinois for her 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. O'Donnell, for being here today. I believe that the school bus program is really a crucial way to make our community safer and our children safer. And I represent a district in Illinois which has happily embraced the program. Illinois school districts that applied in the first round of rebates now have 120 clean school buses that are out there. I know that in the Chicago area that I represent, there are 14 school districts in the Chicago area, so obviously they're also from around different parts of the states. And meantime, we have 69 school districts in Illinois that are on waiting lists, so I know that many are going to want to participate to participate in this. We've heard from some bus drivers who say that they find that on the bus now things are quieter, that students seem to have a more calm environment. But we also hear from the school districts who have found that it is easier for them to recruit and retain bus drivers when they are using these buses. And, there is a shortage, I think of trying to hire bus drivers, and this seems to be a real incentive. So I would say that the program is off, in our experience, to a good start with a good deal of enthusiasm from school districts, from bus drivers, and I'm certain that the children are benefiting from the cleaner air that they're able to experience. And as I said earlier, the community too, these buses drive up and down the streets of all of our neighborhoods, rural and urban, and definitely if we can reduce the pollution from those school buses, that would be a big plus. And I think that's part of the direction that we want to be going in. I have to tell you that I'm a little confused about the timing of this hearing. You have, you are in the midst of an audit, as I understand it. You are doing investigations, which at this point, I understand that you don't really want to share with us. So I'm not quite sure why we're having this, because I think all of us would agree that we want to make sure that this program is functioning well, that taxpayers are getting what they need, and that we are answering all the questions that need to be. So it's not that I don't agree that you do the audit and that you do the investigations. But what I wanted to ask you is if you would commit to taking into consideration all of the things, including some of the really positive things, like, are we able to address the shortage if we are using these buses? Would we be more inclined to get the staff that we need to make sure that our kids are getting to school? And would you commit to including all the positives as well in this research and audit?
One of the things that you learn in my job, as I have been in it for several years, is that it's rare that people are excited to see me. When I go to the EPA, it's just, I'm just not the most popular, like the dinner guest. And I really emphasize the fact that, the EPA has this goal of getting out these clean school buses and really having that health benefit that you talk about. And what we do more than anything else, we're not trying to, we don't play gotcha. I tell this to the agency all the time. We're not trying to play gotcha. We're not trying to surprise you. We want to make sure that what you're doing actually happens. And so to speak to all the good things that you talked about, what my investigators talk about it all the time. And we really put it in terms of environmental justice, but it goes beyond that. And it's not about who the recipient is at the end of the day. It's not about those school districts. It's about the kids on the school bus in the neighborhoods. And we have to start early to make sure that those dollars get there. As I said, there's a 71-page waiting list. We've already heard a third of rebate applicants have asked to actually delay reimbursement. So that's $188 million, at least our preliminary numbers, that could have gone to school districts that are right now ready to go. And so it's really useful, I think, for us to get in now, in year one, rather than year 5, to look at exactly the sort of things that you're speaking to.
Okay, so you will make a commitment to do a program-wide audit of all of the things positive as well as some of the problems. Thank you.
We're good news as well as bad news.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and I just want to say we're always glad to see you here at this subcommittee. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And representing one of those flatland areas that you talked about, we have a different problem in that many of our communities are located long distances from each other. While we don't have to traverse a mountain range or look for a mountain tunnel, we might have miles and miles of Texas to get across to get from one location to the other. I was concerned when Mr. Griffith was talking about the football team taking the electric bus to an away game. A lot of those games are going to be played during late fall and early winter. And I don't know if the buses work as well in cold temperatures or if the battery life is affected by cold temperatures. I suspect that it is. So is there a safety issue that we need to be concerned about with a busload of kids on a bus that now can't make it back from points unknown in a very cold environment where they can't keep the heater on because the battery's dead?
Thank you. And as a proud graduate of Texas A&M University, though last Saturday was tough, I understand the love of football and the importance of it in our discussion here.
Let me interrupt you there for just a minute. But the Horns won. They beat Alabama. I yield back.
You're doubling down on the bad. I think that this is one of those factors that goes into that Congress that you all specifically put into consideration, which is those local conditions. And the statute does say the weather, the bus route, and the likes. And so we're going to make sure that the EPA considered these things in reviewing the applications these are the criteria that Congress expressed and how these dollars would be spent.
Well, I will tell you, I don't think many of these grants or rebates have been awarded in the state of Texas. I've got to do my own due diligence and find out why that is, and I may get back to you with a question in writing in that regard. But I have to admit, you jogged my memory when you talked about putting the school bus engine to rest. And the YouTube video of the Volvo that wouldn't die came flooding back to me. If you remember the Cash for Clunkers program, the dealer was required to demonstrate to get the money that they had, in fact, irreparably harmed that engine so it would never function again. And then the little Volvo that could, they drained the oil out, they put the liquid glass in, and the damn thing wouldn't stop. I mean, it just kept chugging away. Is that what you're talking about with these school buses?
Partly. I think there's that aspect of the destruction of the older diesel school buses, and then with respect to the ones from 2011 and to us, whether those are being appropriately handled. I don't think double dipping is allowed. You can't replace the same bus twice, and we will work with the EPA to make sure that they're not being defrauded in that regard.
But when, in part of your answer to one of Mr. Griffith's questions, Chair Griffith's questions was he was concerned about, I think, that aspect of double dipping. But when you sell a school bus to another school district, you haven't done anything to reduce the emissions then. You've just simply expended money to have an electric bus in a new district, but the old district, or the district uses the old bus, is going to then continue with whatever emissions problems were going on previously. Is that not correct?
That's what I understand, yes.
But in any case, you are going to, is this already occurring where they're poisoning older buses with liquid glass? I mean, so this is a carryover of the DARA program, which replaced dirty diesel in general, but 40% of that went to school buses, and so there's some experience in retiring these older buses, and I should say the scope of that is we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and now we're talking billions of dollars. So the EPA really has this work cut out for it, and making sure that the school buses are being retired appropriately. Now, you mentioned in your written testimony, and I apologize for having to be back and forth with another hearing that we've got going on about the the rebates and the fact that that's an unusual or a different type of arrangement than has previously been entered into. Are you finding now with transitioning to grants, which my understanding is that is going on, are you finding that is more auditable to be able to look at those grants?
The grants, awarded grants will of course be done consistent with the Uniform Grant Guidance and other requirements. The rebates do not. Rebates are the riskiest way to distribute money. And so that, for us, when we, the EPA has made a decision to use rebates in the first round, possibly use in the third round. That's their decision. Our, of course, role is to make sure that they're not being defrauded in issuing. The EPA also has a mission in that as well. But, yes, just to short answer, obviously, rebates would give any Inspector General discomfort.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just have to say, in Texas, we've had a pretty hot summer. School already started at the early part of September with still 110-degree days. The problem we encountered, lots of solar energy was being generated, which is a good thing. But then people get home and the sun goes down, they crank up the AC, and the grid got into trouble. If we plug in a bunch of school buses after the evening run, I mean, that's going to be a problem too, is additional strain on the grid. I hope someone is looking at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Dr. Ruiz for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The infrastructure law did indeed have a lot of money to fortify the electrical grid. So in anticipation of electrifying our economy, we put in money to fortify the grid precisely for those efforts. And if we could get the Republican support and their hands off of that money, in repealing it, then I think that we would address with anticipation the high demand, which is a good thing, a good problem to have, especially when we want to go with a renewable energy economy. The EPA's Clean School Bus Program is a successful and popular program that follows through on the Democrats' commitment to the clean energy transition. The bipartisan infrastructure law provided funding to EPA so that we can help school districts replace their old diesel buses with clean school buses. And last October, EPA announced that 400 applications were selected for awards to replace thousands of old buses, including in my district, the Coachella Valley Unified School District. And I'm proud to say that I supported their application, and this funding that they received will help provide students in my district with a safe and cool ride home, because they have no air conditioning in the desert with 115, 120 degrees Fahrenheit weather for weeks. This is essential for students in my district where, of course, temperatures can reach extreme levels, and it is imperative that students have school buses equipped with air conditioning. Additionally, not only is this program helping us fight to protect our children from heat-related illnesses, but it also will help us address climate change by fighting for the health of our environment. Early evidence is promising as schools realize projected cost savings by not having to entirely rely on diesel and gas-powered school buses. This is important for rural and impoverished schools. Unfortunately, today I've heard incredibly misleading statements about how the bipartisan infrastructure law requires the EPA to administer the Clean School Bus funds, and I want to take this opportunity to clear up any of misunderstandings about these requirements. So, Mr. O'Donnell, Congress required that half of the awards made under the program go to clean buses that have zero emissions, while the other half be delivered to clean school buses that Congress defined as having low and zero emissions. So I think we were clear, but there seems to be some confusion on the other side of the aisle. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Does the statute require the EPA to evenly split funds between low and zero emission school buses?
Yes.
As an ER doctor, I know firsthand how the environment and vehicle emissions impact our health. And we know that the environmental and health impacts of climate change hit low-income rural and tribal communities the hardest, and these communities have the fewest resources to respond with. That's why it was important for Congress to prioritize applications from schools in these communities, like those in my district. In doing this, we're ensuring that these communities are prepared for the future and participating in the clean energy transition. Mr. O'Donnell, are you evaluating how the EPA has applied prioritization requirements so that applications from these communities are prioritized as Congress intended?
I believe the evaluation that we've been talking about will include that.
Okay, and are you aware of any unique challenges these communities face when it comes to applying for these funds?
I think that what you will hear the agency speak to often is that applying, just at the very beginning, applying for grants it's a whole profession, and these school districts with fewer resources don't have the experience in grant writing, and so there's that concern. And then also, and this is a concern for us, is on the recipient side, once they have the money, that money is being spent appropriately. As you know,
are there any best practices to assist with capacity for people to apply for the funds and to manage the funds? Any best practices out there?
Well, I think the agency has really gone out and encouraged applicants. They have information sessions for grant applicants. In fact, we participate in those to the extent that we did fraud awareness briefings, so that the school districts are familiar with what sort of the red flags are and doing. Remember, it's not only just school districts that are applying, it's third-party contractors who can apply. And so that adds a layer of complexity in the relationships. And so if we can help the school districts understand what the potential for fraud is, that'll help them get that.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me push this back a little bit. I think it's a little overcharged. One of the things I want to point out is that we're incentivizing state and local school districts to purchase electric we've had, let me move to another microphone. We've had,
And if we could reset his time too, we've had that problem before. Apologize to you, Inspector General, but
Oh, no
he's going to shift chairs so he can get a mic that works. You'd think the committee in charge of electronic communications could figure this out.
you could have left Mr. Burtis's name there. I heard he made a catty comment about the University of Alabama and Texas football game, which should be struck from the record.
Without objection.
Well, my point is that we're incentivizing these schools to purchase buses that are not living up to the expectations. And I have an article here where officials in Ann Arbor, and they said these buses cost 5 times as more than a regular bus, and that's just for the bus. And the electrical infrastructure, which was originally estimated to be about $50,000 for those 4 buses, ended up being more like $200,000. Is this bait and switch?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not familiar with.
Is it just bad math? I mean, that the people who are making these estimates and enticing people to invest in these buses are just not very good at math, and they're finding out when they actually implement the contracts that the costs are excessively higher than they thought. I want to turn to something else that Chairman McMorris Rogers brought up, and that is our reliance on China. The fact of the matter is that if we go to 100% EVs for school buses, we will be 100% reliant on China. I mean, they control most of the lithium mining and processing. Same is true for cobalt. 90-something% of the materials, anodes, cathodes, that sort of thing for the batteries are sourced from China. I've made this point many times that we don't make batteries in the United States. We assemble them from the parts we get from China. I mean, if we get into a situation where we're no longer able to source this, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble if we've gone to 100% reliance on EV school buses. And I do appreciate Dr. Ruiz pointing out that the money can be spent on other types of cleaner fuel. Would that include compressed natural gas?
The statute allows that, yes.
Yeah, and what we found with CNG is it produces far fewer emissions, saves money, it improves energy security because it is almost 100% domestically sourced. Should that be, should CNG be given a higher priority considering the benefits that we have here, and particularly in terms of it being domestically sourced?
The prioritization is set forth in the statute, so, you know, I think the question for us in the evaluation will be whether the EPA is observing those, but as far as fuel types, there wasn't a priority and prioritization for the fuel types.
I know your area is the EPA. I do think, though, that we need to bring in the National Transportation Safety Board into this as well, because when you go to a battery-powered bus, a regular bus, which would be a Type C bus, that's the one that everybody thinks of when they think school bus, weighs between 25 and 30,000 pounds, fully loaded. But when that bus is a battery-powered bus, the weight of that bus goes up significantly. And Mr. Chairman, I think maybe we ought to have some discussion with the National Transportation Safety Board about, we had a hearing in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee a couple of years ago about the number of school children that are killed in school bus accidents. And I think the significant increase in weight of these buses needs to be a factor in our consideration for this. I just want to make sure, I think it's up to the local school boards what they want to do, but I do think that they're being incentivized by federal money to make purchases that right now I don't think make a lot of sense. The limited range of the buses, I was just looking at one of the high schools in my district, Thompson High School, And they transport their football team, their athletic teams by school bus, and they played a game against Opelika. If that had been electric buses, I don't know of any charging stations between Alabaster, the city where Thompson High School is, and Opelika. They wouldn't have had the range to make that trip and get back on one charge. So there are a number of issues that I think need to be addressed here, that maybe not all of which can be addressed by the EPA. Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging and for letting me switch microphones. I yield back.
Is the gentleman saying that unless the game lasts 8 to 10 hours, he might not get home? Is that what the gentleman's saying?
Well, that's assuming that there's a charging station.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. I now, gentleman's yielded back. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have an opportunity to improve the health of our communities, grow the middle class through jobs created by the clean energy transition, and avert the worst effects of climate change at the same time. It is possible to do all this through the meaningful investments made by the EPA and other federal agencies. That's why last Congress, Democrats made investments in the Clean School Bus Program through the bipartisan infrastructure law. When we invest in clean, zero-emission buses for our schools, we are prioritizing the health and well-being of our children and our communities while also growing our domestic manufacturing base. I am proud of the work the Environment Subcommittee did to help develop and enact this program, and it's already working. Earlier this year, I joined Regional Administrator Garcia and Leonard Bus Sales in Saratoga Springs, which is working to deliver 17 electric buses to 6 school districts across New York State. And I do want even more of our communities to benefit from this opportunity. So, Mr. O'Donnell, I completely agree that we must make certain this program is implemented effectively, and I do know EPA shares that goal, and the team there is working diligently to ensure that every dollar counts. And as part of effective implementation, it is critically important that these investments reach the communities that are most in need. As you know, the law allows EPA to prioritize applicants that support low-income, rural, and tribal school districts. So, in your testimony, you stated that your evaluation will look at the program's selection process. Will this include any analysis of or recommendations for how EPA can ensure that funds are reaching the communities most in need?
I believe it will consider the use of those prioritization factors that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And as you know, the administration has adopted the Justice 40 commitment, which seeks to provide 40% of the benefits of programs like this one to frontline and underserved communities. I believe an evaluation of the program's effectiveness and its selection methods should address whether Justice 40 goals are being achieved. And if EPA is not meeting those targets, I hope the selection process recommendations that you will consider providing will address how we can do better on this front. So, Mr. O'Donnell, do you believe that fulfilling the agency's environmental justice goals is important in the evaluation of the program effectiveness?
In fact, we have spoken as a top management challenge to the EPA, environmental justice, and with respect to, in the lead up to these programs, we've issued lessons learned, including lessons learned on DERA, that the agency needs to have actual performance measures in these programs. I don't think we'd want the performance goals for this to be just get the dollars out or just get the school buses out, but that we're actually addressing the sort of targeted, prioritized funding and support that you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm. And all Americans, regardless of their zip code, deserve the benefits that cleaner air and healthy communities provide. And the Clean School Bus Program is an important part of that effort. So constructive, targeted oversight can indeed help ensure this program succeeds so that everyone, our children and all involved, benefit from the clean buses. With that, Mr. Chair, I thank you and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady of Florida, Ms. Kamick, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Okay, there we go. I don't know if that's working.
I can hear you.
I know, well. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman Griffith, for hosting this hearing today. Thank you for appearing before the committee. I know we've covered quite a bit here today on this issue, so I want to dive into a little bit of a niche issue. So I understand that this program provides funding for school districts and other recipients to replace their existing buses with zero emission or clean school buses. However, how are these recipients able to afford to repair and maintain these buses is a huge concern. As I've been chatting with superintendents in my district, this has been a reoccurring theme and question. For example, a public school system in Ann Arbor that adopted electric buses reportedly experienced a lot of, quote, performance issues. Additionally, a California public transit authority that adopted electric buses reportedly saw more than 1/3 of its fleet inoperable on one particular day. Further, one of this agency's buses was out of service for 275 days due to a lack of available parts. So under this latest round of funding, the 2023 Clean School Bus Grant Program, the EPA states that one of the requirements...
If the gentlelady would yield for a minute, it appears that your microphone is not working.
It says it's green, but I know it's not.
All right, well, they're picking it up? All right, they're picking it up. I apologize for interrupting you.
Okay.
We will resume.
Put on them because I didn't have any charging ports back here.
Okay,
Okay, we good?
we're good.
Okay. So under this last round of funding, the 2023 Clean School Bus Grant Program, the EPA states that one of the requirements for replacement buses under this program is that the bus serve the school district listed on the application for at least 5 years from the date of delivery. So is your office, one, aware of any concerns that school districts or other recipients may not be able to afford the upkeep of these buses and may not want to, or be able to afford to keep them for 5 years? And let me add a caveat that if you do a quick Google search, there is a number of articles and situations that you can find around the country where the people, the contractors who are servicing these contracts and these fleets, they don't even have enough technicians to service the fleets, which is perpetuating this problem. Have you guys been talking about this? Are you aware of this?
So I would say more broadly in our discussions with stakeholders, but this goes to the water and wastewater sector. We hear this all the time, that you're going to help us build a new wastewater treatment facility, but then how are we going to maintain it or what have you? With respect to the school buses, I don't think we have yet. It's early in the engagement. We're always open to discussions, and it is something I think that is worth looking at.
So how would you propose that the EPA monitor whether the replacement bus fulfilled this requirement and the school district actually used it for 5 years? That's the first part. Second part is, what would happen if the school district or other recipient attempted to resell the bus? And is anyone at the EPA aware of situations like this, and have they taken action?
I'm not aware that what the EPA's plans are with sort of post-funding performance. It's an issue that we always raise with the agency, regardless of the program, that it needs to have better program management and performance measures. And so this is one of those areas. We've spoken to it generally in our lessons learned as they've run up to this, and I'm sure that in the course of our oversight, as we sort of get to that part, we will look at how they're measuring performance afterward. And as you said, the statute is clear, 5 years, and the EPA, it does give the EPA the right to ask for the money back if they don't perform according to those criteria.
How often have you asked for a post-program lessons learned recap for various programs throughout the agency?
So you know, some of these issues, like you're speaking to, we start to get into our fraud fighting function, and there have been times when it's been very challenging working with the EPA on the law enforcement side. As you can imagine, when you have different law enforcement organizations in one agency, they can sometimes bicker. But my sense of it is, recently, the EPA takes seriously. I've been impressed, and I'm not here to vouch for them, and a sincere interest to make sure that the money is going where it should go. That's desire. Hope is not a method, and so we're going to work with them to make sure that it gets where where it should go. There's a lot of work to go into it, though.
Well, of all the recommendations that you have made, how many have been adopted?
We don't have a lot of, I think right now we have 120 some open or unresolved recommendations with the agency across all of our work. So we do a relatively good job of resolving recommendations.
Is there a time in which, like a 90-day, 30-day, 60-day block that they have to adopt, accept or reject said recommendation?
Yeah, I think is it 60 days? 60 or 90 days under their policies to agree to a corrective action. We want to see corrective actions that meet the intent of our recommendations.
So these 100 plus are relatively recent then?
No, some are quite old.
How old?
Oh, more than 5 years.
Ah, government efficiency at work.
Well, we don't always agree, and, we force the agency, but they don't always agree with us.
I appreciate that. I am over my time, so with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Gentlelady yields back and now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last Congress, Democrats delivered for the middle class by passing the bipartisan infrastructure law and making unprecedented investments to combat climate change, rebuild infrastructure, and bolster domestic manufacturing. The Clean School Bus Program is one of the many programs making meaningful investments to meet these goals, and early results suggest that this program is off to a good start. Unfortunately, Republicans have relentlessly criticized the Clean School Bus Program. Even after the first awards went out to underserved communities for clean buses, Republicans have continued to undermine EPA. So let me ask you, Mr. O'Donnell, in your written testimony, you said that if you had to give this program a grade today, quote, it would be incomplete, end of quote. Now, while I can understand that EPA still has funds to disperse, I'm concerned that some of the characterizations in your testimony could be misread as conclusions about EPA's implementation, and I think that would be particularly problematic given your office has not completed its own early work to evaluate the program. So my first question is, would you like to clarify anything in that testimony to help us better understand which stage you are at in evaluating implementation of the Clean School Bus Program?
Oversight's an ongoing process, and it's one that, since the IIJA has passed, we have been engaged in robustly. It includes audits and evaluations, but it also includes investigations, and then also other types of products, like I said, lessons learned. And so, we are in that first round of funding. The EPA chose to use rebates. Those are very risky. We're still waiting to see the results. We're hoping, I think everyone hopes, our goal is to make sure, to help the agency make sure that all that money benefits the beneficiaries as intended. But right now, it's very early to tell if the design of that program is meeting the goals of the program.
Now, when can we expect to see the results of your initial audit?
Of our first audit, soon.
Oh, that's the best you can say.
I'm hoping this calendar year for sure.
Okay. Now, I understand that inspectors general often engage with agency staff in order to discuss potential findings and recommendations before the release of a final report. Have you or your staff conveyed any findings and recommendations, or even the lack of findings and recommendations, to EPA staff regarding the Clean School Bus Program?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And are there any preliminary findings that you can share to give us an idea of what you are or not finding?
Right. So as I spoke to in my written testimony and here today, for us, I think the biggest, most noteworthy finding, at least preliminarily, is that there was not a requirement for consultation with the utilities in supporting the sort of hookup of the chargers. And the result of that is we've seen about 500 buses, 500 requests for buses that they've asked for extensions in order to consult with the local utilities to make sure that they can support and get that hooked up.
And when do you expect to issue any interim or final report?
Well, as I said, by this calendar year.
By this calendar year, okay. Now, I will keep an eye on that deadline, obviously, interested to see what you find. If there are issues, we want to make sure that we're working to fix them so this program succeeds, and I know the hardworking staff at EPA are dedicated to its success as well. And while I think it is clear this hearing is premature, as an audit has not yet been completed, I do appreciate the opportunity to hear from you and your work with you as your audits and evaluations are completed. We all want the Clean School Bus Program to be successful, because it is protecting children in the communities where we represent, and good oversight can be a big part of ensuring that success. So again, let me thank you, and I'll yield back my time at this point.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cardenas, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Chairman Griffith, and also Vice Chair Lesko and Ranking Member Castor for allowing me to wave on today. And thank you, Inspector General O'Donnell, for being here and answering our questions. While I'm excited to discuss the promise of this amazing program, I wish this hearing was conducted in better faith by my Republican colleagues, as your full report is yet to be done and your audits are still ongoing. That's why I will use my time as an opportunity to discuss the many benefits of this extremely popular program. More than 20 million students across the United States ride the bus to school every single day. This poses an issue because riding diesel buses exposes children to significant air pollution, leading to higher rates of respiratory illnesses and health complications. Last Congress, we offered a solution. We made $5 billion available to schools through the school bus program, Clean School Bus Program, in the bipartisan infrastructure law to replace diesel buses with clean, low, and zero-emission school buses. As the sponsor of the Clean Commute for Kids Act, which was the genesis of this effort, I paid particular close attention to the roll out of the program to ensure that it is operating the way Congress intended. At the launch of the Clean School Bus Program last year, $500 million was made available out of the first initial $5 billion Congress provided. The response from school districts was nothing short of tremendous. School districts in all 50 states jumped at the opportunity to receive clean school buses through this program. This includes Democratic and Republican districts spanning urban, suburban, and rural communities. Demand has been great in every state. The EPA received more than 2,000 applications for the initial $500 million funding opportunity. Applications totaled more than $4 billion in requests for over 12,000 buses, 90% of which were for electric school buses. And it's up to the locals to decide what they want to apply for. It's not required that they apply for electric school buses specifically. The EPA responded to this overwhelming demand by increasing the funding for this first round to nearly $1 billion. And still, applications for approximately 8,500 electric school buses went unfilled after the first round of awards. Despite this data and this clear demand, my Republican counterparts perpetuate false narratives about the program, many of which we have heard today. When Administrator Regan testified regarding the EPA's fiscal year 24 budget earlier this year, I asked him about the Clean School Bus Program. He reminded the committee that it's a voluntary program, one that has granted applicants electric, propane, and compressed natural gas buses. Under the program, schools can choose the technology that best suits their needs. Choice is embedded in this program, and thus far, school districts are overwhelmingly choosing electric school buses. Nearly all of my colleagues on this subcommittee on both sides of the aisle represent school districts that have applied for funding under the initial rebate program. A clean ride to school for kids should not be a partisan issue. The school districts we represent don't see this opportunity as red or blue. Our school districts are sending us a clear message. They are ready to replace dirty, dangerous diesel with cleaner vehicles. To help achieve a clean commute for kids, it's on us to provide a strong program that is equipped with adequate resources to meet the monumental task of cleaning up our nation's school bus fleets. That's why, along with 110 of my congressional colleagues, we wrote to the leaders of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees to build off the down payment made in the bipartisan infrastructure law by requesting an additional $300 million for the Clean School Bus Program in fiscal year 24. That is also why I welcome good faith, constructive congressional oversight and hope we can stop wasting time on these misguided fishing expeditions into programs that are benefiting our communities and most notably our little children across America. Inspector General O'Donnell, thank you again for your time. And today, I look forward to having the opportunity to review and discuss the results of your office's audit of the program when it is completed. And with that, again, I thank you so much for your dedication. You have a career of being an amazing public servant. I know that you are in a very important position, and I look forward to your report, and hopefully we'll have you again when your report is complete. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back, and appreciate his questions. It appears that we have no additional witnesses at this time. I'm not expecting any of you. You expecting anybody else? Okay. That being said, I ask unanimous consent to certain of the record documents included in the staff hearing document list. Without objection, that will be the order. Seeing no further members to ask, I would again thank our witness, to ask questions, thank our witness for being here today. Appreciate your time, appreciate your input. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask that the witness respond within 10 business days upon receipt of those questions. Without objection, subcommittee is adjourned.
Thank you. No objection. Always enjoy coming.
And we like seeing you.